Welcome to Apple Night DIY. I'm Monica. Thanks for joining me. I am co-hosting with two of my favorites, Dawn of Shabby Meets Bling and Annie of Crafting with Indiana Jones, for It's Always Halloween collab. We're joined by lots of our talented friends who also love Halloween, and you're going to find links in the description box to their channels as well as to the playlist. By the way, how cute is this collab graphic? Dawn made it. Thanks, Dee. Right, let's get into it. So for today's project, I'm going to transform this old candle jar into a sweet Halloween cat wearing a ghost costume. The cat's name is Snacks because, I don't know, I thought that was adorable. I'll also be using some Mod Podge and what's left of this Daz clay. For embellishment, I'm going to use a little bit of my homemade festooning. I'll link my video on how to make it in case, you haven't seen it already. And I think that's good to get us started. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to apply a coat of Mod Podge onto my jar. Mod Podge will give the clay something to cling to, and it's just an extra precaution. I've never used clay on glass like this before, so I wanted to make sure that once the clay dried, it would stick. The Mod Podge is supposedly going to help with that. And as you can see, I'm just using a cosmetic sponge to pounce it on. We'll set that aside to dry. And in the meantime, we will condition our clay by kneading it and squishing it. This is going to help distribute the moisture, which should keep the clay from cracking as it dries. And now I'm going to roll it out nice and thin. I want enough to wrap around the surface of our jar. Trimmed my clay out here, and I am just going to line it up with the center of the jar and press it into place. I want the clay to interlock in the back, so obviously I want the ends to touch. It's just a little bit short here, so I'm going to fill in that bare spot with a little bit more clay. I'll spritz that area of clay with water, and I'm going to use the back of a plastic spoon to incorporate the patch with the rest of the clay already on there. Now, as you know, this will also help smooth the clay out. I'm not really going to worry too much about the smoothness right now because we still have a lot to do and we'll be able to come back to that later. But right now, I'm really just concerned about the clay adhering to the jar. You feel me? So we are going to want to fill in that space at the top and bottom of the jar with more clay. So I'm just going to patch those bare spots, just like I did before, adding a wee bit of clay and incorporating it with the clay already on there. Again, I'm employing that plastic spoon to help melt the clays together. I made myself an oval out of cardstock, and I'm going to trace it onto the clay where I want my cat's face to go. And I'm just going to use my pointy tool here. I'm doing this really lightly just to make a very light impression. Now I'm going to start to build out the cat's nose. So I have here a little bit of clay that I'll attach to the center of the oval, and I'm going to use my wire tool to score the area. This is going to help the clay of the nose stick to the clay on the jar. I'm going to work this clay, shaping it as I go, using both my fingers and my pointy tool until I'm happy with the shape of the nose. And to be honest, at first I wasn't really sure what I wanted the nose to look like. I was thinking about building it up a little bit, but then I decided we would go with a more, cartoony nose, more of a button nose. So really, I guess I do trim away a lot of that excess clay in the end to just make it a round, cute button cat nose. And I'm going to use my small ball tool here to add nostrils, just pressing them into the underside of the nose. I rolled a small clay ball and I cut it in half to create little cheeks for our cat. So I'm going to pop his cheeks on either side of his nose. And I'm going to incorporate those cheeks using my pointy tool. I'm also going to use that tool to draw the cat's mouth. Once again, I'm just making a really light impression. To create the ears, I rolled another ball and cut it in half. I'm going to pinch the top into a point, forming somewhat of a rounded triangle. They almost look like Hershey Kisses, but flat on one side. Once again, I'm scoring the area with my wire tool, dampening that area just a wee bit, and pushing my ears into place. Now I'm going to spread the clay from the ear onto the clay beneath it with my tool, and I smooth it as I go. It's really, well, you've heard me say this before, it's like spreading peanut butter or butter. I'm just kind of pulling the clay down from the ear and smoothing it onto the clay beneath. I'm going to repeat this with the other ear. I'm also going to add an outline to the ear, just like I did with the mouth, again keeping it just a really light impression. I want the bottom of the ghost costume to have a wee bit of a drape to it, so to create that, I'm going to roll out a cane of clay and wrap it around the base of the jar. And of course, I'm going to incorporate the cane clay with the jar clay by dampening it and using my pointy tool to smooth the two clays together. Oh yeah, we want to score that area first too. That definitely helps the new clay stick to the existing clay. I'm also going to flare that clay out ever so slightly with my fingers, just to make it look like it's puddling and draping on the floor around the bottom of the cat. You know what I'm saying? I want Snacks to have a jack-o'-lantern, so I am rolling a small ball of clay, which I am going to attach to the very front of the jar, just below his face. This is also going to pull some of that orange in that will be in the festooning on the hat. Once again, I'm going to score the clay on the jar, and then we'll pop the pumpkin into place, and I'll incorporate it just like I did with the other clay. I'm also going to use my tool to make the impression of ribs on the pumpkin as well, just one on either side. I roll another small cane of clay to create the cat's tail, which I will incorporate onto the back of the jar. And of course, we're going to add a wee curl to it. I'm going to cover the lid with clay, starting with the top, pressing it to make sure it's well stuck. Then I'm going to trim out the sides, working the clay and smoothing it as best I can. I really just want to make sure that all the metal on the lid is completely covered. So I'm grabbing what's left of my clay and I'm going to create a cone shape because we want him to have a party hat that will sit atop the lid. You know what I mean? Kind of like a witch's hat. So I'm just doing my best to shape out a cone. No biggie. Flattening the bottom. Adding a wee point. I think we'll curl it over just a smidge. Now, of course, normally I would use a toothpick to attach a big piece of clay like this to its base, but we don't have that option here. So I'm going to use a little bit of wood glue on the center of the lid and pop my cone right on top of that. And just like before, I'll incorporate the clay of the cone with the clay on the lid. And now all we have to do is let these pieces dry overnight. Right, all dry and looking good. So we will start by giving our cat's ghost costume 2 coats of white acrylic paint. I was inspired to make this cat in a ghost costume via a vintage Halloween card, but I was watching somebody and they were doing a Halloween Cracker Barrel haul and they had a mug of a cat dressed as a ghost with a jack-o'-lantern in its mouth. So I was wondering if Cracker Barrel was inspired by the same card. Be interesting to know. However, I don't think the Cracker Barrel mug has a hat, but I don't know, I could be mistaken on that. Anyway, I am going to base coat the lid hat, or the hat lid, whatever you prefer, with 2 coats of Ceramcoat charcoal. And while we're at it, we're going to paint the cat's face that's poking through the white sheet, as well as the ears and the tail with the charcoal. I'm going to do 2 applications of American Spiced Pumpkin to our cat's wee trick-or-treat jack-o'-lantern. I have to say that this is probably my favorite orange color for the season. And this orange is going to sync up really nicely with the orange that will be in the festooning on the hat. Now let's work on some features. I'm going to start off filling in his eyes with some white. After I've outlined them, I'll fill them in. And they're going to get 2 coats as well, of the white. As far as I can remember, the inspiration card for this had more of a traditional cat's eye, but I wanted my cat to have more of that vintage cartoon look, so I did change up the eyes. Let's fill in his ears with the white as well, and also I'm going to trim out his mouth with the white, give him fangs. Snacks is going to need some lashes. So we'll get those in there first, and then we'll do his mouth and his fangs. And a couple of wee whiskery eyebrows. And you know what? Let's add a couple of spiced pumpkin strokes in the cat's ears, like so. To create his iris, I'm going to dip the end of a dowel into the spiced pumpkin, dotting, and then pulling the dowel downward to create the shape. I was debating on whether to use orange or maybe use a green in here for the iris, but I figured, you know what, we'll just stick with the 3 colors, the orange, black, and white. Stick with the traditional. I'm going to come in with my detail brush and do some correcting of the shapes, spread out the paint, and just make the shape a little more definitive. Yeah, I think I'm going to outline around the white part of the ear with the pumpkin as well. I'm going to dry brush the nose and cheeks with more of that spiced pumpkin. As always, I'm going to start out really lightly and keep adding until I'm happy with the depth of color. You guys know the deal. To create his pupil, I'm using a smaller dowel, dipping that into some charcoal, and dotting and dragging just like I did to create the iris. With charcoal, I'll add some features to the jack-o'-lantern. Just simple little triangles for eyes, a cute wee crooked mouth, and I'm going to dot on his nose. Now let's add some white dot highlights to the cat's eyes, cheeks, nose, and of course to the jack-o'-lantern. I want that jack-o'-lantern to stand out a wee bit more, so I'm going to outline it with the charcoal. I think this will make it pop off of the white of the sheet. Know what I'm saying? I'm going to add an opening to the top of the jack-o'-lantern, so I'm just painting that in with more of the charcoal. Okay, that looks good. So now with a small flat brush and some white paint, let's add a swirl to the hat. I'm starting at the top of the cone, and I'm going to turn the hat as I lay down the white stripe, reloading the brush as necessary. And I'm going to do my best to keep it relatively neat. With Spiced Pumpkin, I'm going to ride the one edge of that white stripe to pull in that orange, and I'm going to use a fine detail brush for this. Just going to ride right along the one edge. Real quick here, I'm going to add a strap from the jack-o'-lantern to the cat's mouth with Ceramcoat Rain Gray. Just a couple quick lines. Now let's add some shading with Folk Art Floating Medium. The medium is this clear gel here. I'm going to get a very healthy coat on my brush, working it into the bristles. I will side load with Rain Gray by scooping up the paint onto the corner of my brush. I stroke the brush on my plate to blend the medium with the paint, creating a gradient of color from dark to light. It's darkest at the paint corner of my brush, and it's going to fade as it moves toward the middle of the bristles. Holding the paint corner where I want the darkest shadow, here at the edge of the face, I'm going to lay down my shading, floating that gray right along his face here. I'm reloading my brush with paint and medium as necessary, and I'm keeping the strokes light and feathery. We are going to go completely around the face and the ears, and then around the jack-o'-lantern, and of course we can't forget the tail. If at any point I feel like the line is too harsh, I can always add a little more float to my brush and come back in and stroke over the previous stroke. That will feather it out nicely. How cute is that wheat tail? Got to float around that. Now I want some shadow at the bottom, so I am going to float around the bottom of the sheet where it puddles on the floor, just adding a little gray around the edges. This will also help to give it a good grungy look. We'll add shading at the top around the edges as well. Also, let's paint in some draping and creasing lines. And let's also float around the edge of the white on the hat with the Rain Gray. Just real subtle, but we do want to pull that color in. And let's add a wee bit on the jack-o'-lantern with the Rain Gray before we move on to floating inside the face with black. First, just to clean up the edges around the features, particularly around his eyes, I'm going to load the detail brush with some black and just outline the eyes. And you know what, the ears too. I've loaded my small flat brush with floating medium and black acrylic paint, and I'm going to float around the inside edge of the cat's face. Reloading is necessary. And we'll also do the inside edge of the tail. And that's pretty much it for the painting. I'm going to use my DecoArt multi-purpose sealer To add a layer of protection to Snacks, the ghostly cat, and of course his hat, I'll be pouncing it on with a cosmetic sponge. This stuff not only protects the clay, but it also gives it a really nice finished appearance. And finally, I'm going to add some of my homemade festooning to trim out the hat. I'll be using 3-in-1 glue and a little dab of hot glue to attach it around the edge of the hat. Then all we need to do is fill our jar with some Halloween treats. Let's take a final look at Snacks the ghostly cat. And here's Snacks in all his vintage Halloween glory. He's hoping his treat bucket will run it over with goodies. And here's a quick look at his sweet tail. I think Snacks turned out pretty cool. I love when I can take something random like a jar and turn it into fun seasonal decor. Okay, so let me know what you think. I want to thank Dawn and Annie for co-hosting. Please be sure to check out their channels. Also, please be sure to check out all the videos on the playlist for more Halloween fun. You'll find links in the description box. Show everyone some love. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. Stay creative, my friends. Thanks for hanging with me. See you next time. Up all night with Monica.